Joining us now from Santa Barbara, California, Democratic strategist and former Deputy White House Press Secretary Bill Burton in a fetching pair of new glasses. And here in the studio in an always fetching new or even old hat, a man whose smile and twinkling blue eyes are what's called equal parts charm and mischief. Political media strategist and co-creator, co-host, and co-executive producer of The Circus, Mark McKinnon. Bill, I'll start with you with the question I was going to ask Margaret if we hadn't run out of time. You know President Obama pretty well. He devoted a lot of time, effort, and energy to trying to pick up Hillary Clinton on his big, broad shoulders politically and drag her across the finish line. Did not work. So now it seems like everything that he accomplished in the last 8 years is in jeopardy. How do you think he's thinking and feeling about that?
Well, I mean, he's obviously quite disappointed in the outcome of this election. He knew that Hillary Clinton would be a great president and, you know, would also help to carry on some of the things that he had been working on. But, you know, look, I think that the one thing that we all know is that the electorate is a much different thing than we all thought it was yesterday morning when we woke up. And there's so much anger out there and, you know, such a feeling of inattentiveness to what's causing that anger that Democrats are going to have to do some real soul searching to figure out, you know, what's our way forward here.
But just specifically, Bill, like, you know, here's President Obama. Right now, they're already, you know, Mitch McConnell, Donald Trump, they're already talking about first thing out of the gate in January, repeal Obamacare. That must be a chilling thing for Barack Obama to hear that.
Yeah, look, nobody wants that. And for the Americans who would lose health care as a result of that, or would lose access to important to health care at all because they have pre-existing conditions or things like that, I think that people are very concerned about it. But President Obama is especially concerned about it. That's why he passed the law. That's why he signed it into law. And, you know, it's true that it did have some problems, but the problems can be fixed and people don't have to lose their health care. But I think that, you know, Mitch McConnell and Donald Trump are going to throw the baby out with the bathwater, and it's going to leave millions of Americans out in the cold.
If you assume that part of what's going on in the Republican Party now is populist anger at the way elites behave, that they're not fighting enough, you got the Bushes. They don't endorse Donald Trump, and then he gets elected, so they're angry about that. And then Trump gets elected, and all of a sudden they're saying, oh, we're really supporting Donald Trump. We hope he does well. Doesn't that just make people cynical about elites?
It makes them, sure, it makes them cynical about elites, but what I'm really struck by is that of course, we have the shock and surprise of the election itself, but one of the things that everybody talked about was, you know, probably that Trump was going to lose, but they talked a lot about the disarray of the Republican Party. 24 hours later, today, the Republican Party is in better shape than it's been since 1928. Yeah. We have all three branches of government suddenly for the first time in almost 100 years. So
winning will do that.
Yeah, but it's interesting to think about the kind of Republican Party it's going to be because it's anti-trade, pro-entitlements. I guess there's going to be a big infrastructure bill. That's one thing they seem to agree on. So it's kind of a big spending agenda in a way. And I'm interested to see how long that's popular with the rank and file, because I remember how that went south on Bush when he did, for example, the drug prescriptions.
Bill, if you were to call together 3 or 4 or 5 big Democratic thinkers, strategists, elected officials, whatever, to say we need to chart a new course for a national Democratic Party brand with ideas and themes, who are some people you'd bring in the room besides yourself?
Well, I would start with my colleagues, Anita Dunn and Hillary Rosen, and I would probably add in Van Jones, and I would add in
any elected officials who you think?
Yeah, I was just going to say red state Democrats.
There aren't very many of them.
The new governor of the new governor of North Carolina. You know, I think that we need to be attentive to the fact that there's a lot of we have a big problem with middle-class white voters that we haven't been paying attention to, and the Obama coalition is never going to be the Obama coalition again. So we need to grow our share of the electorate. That has to include more middle-class white voters. We've got to be focused on that. So those are the sort of folks I'd bring in. Steve Shale would be good down in Florida.
I thought I was hearing that 24 hours ago from the Republican Party.
Let me ask you this. You know, I mentioned before that there's a little bit of an irony. You run as a populist outsider candidate, and then you get to move to Washington, D.C. if you win, and you get to be the head of the federal government. How does that tension play itself out when you've got Donald Trump having ridden in on that particular rhetorical and substantive horse, arriving there, trying to keep the faith with the people who voted him in as an outsider who wants to blow up the Capitol? Now he's got to run it, and he's got to run it with some real establishmentarians like Paul Ryan and Mitch McConnell. How does that work out?
Well, that's the real trick, and I think you've got to watch the body language very closely over the next couple of weeks, particularly with Paul Ryan. I mean, what's going to make or break this first 100 days will be the relationship between Paul Ryan and Donald Trump.
Bill, I mentioned before this notion of normalizing Trump and how a lot of your colleagues and maybe you criticize people in the press and some Republicans and said, you can't treat him like a normal person. Well, now he's president-elect. He's being greeted at the White House tomorrow by President Obama. Are Democrats now required, or are they obligated to basically treat him like a normal president-elect for the foreseeable future?
Well, I think any normal Republican president-elect would be treated with some level of scrutiny by Democrats, and I certainly think that that's true of Donald Trump. I think he's going to do his best to normalize himself the same way, I was in college in Minnesota when Jesse Ventura was elected governor, and I think he did a good job of trying to take the job seriously for a while and then spectacularly failed. But Donald Trump, for the moment, will do his best to do all the stuff that a normal president-elect will do, but Democrats will be tough.
Let me give you a practical example. We've got this ongoing suit related to Trump University. Should Democratic interest groups and operatives and members of Congress, should they be jumping all over that and saying Donald Trump is corrupt and irresponsible and treats the little gal bad, or should they give him a honeymoon?
I don't think anybody deserves a honeymoon necessarily. I think that Donald Trump, if he broke the law, should be held accountable, and that includes Trump University. I think that the FBI is still looking into Russian ties to his campaign. The IRS is certainly looking into his foundation. There's going to be a lot of questions, and there's certainly going to be a rough patch for
you
the
think
Trump presidency.
You think Democrats should be doing opposition research on that and pushing it all out there and trying to hurt him politically even now? I'm not arguing one way or the other. I'm just asking you what your posture is.
Right. Well, I'm not saying necessarily hurt him politically. If he broke the law, then he should be held into account. And if he skirted IRS rules, then he should certainly be penalized.
But Bill, in the real world,
that hurts him
I understand. But in the real world, Democrats can spend their time trying to fan the flames of that stuff, peddle stuff to reporters the way it's been going on during the campaign, or they can say, well, that stuff can take care of itself. We're going to focus on trying to find common ground with President Trump.
You say in the real world, but you're not talking about the real world. You're talking about Washington, D.C. And in Washington, D.C., politics happens every single day. And I think that if laws are broken, people should be held into account. And I think that that will certainly be the case for President-elect Donald Trump when the chips fall in some of these investigations that are probably happening behind the scenes that we haven't heard about so that they didn't interfere with the election.
Do you think he gets a honeymoon? Just as a matter of fact, will he get the customary kind of honeymoon, at least a short variety that most presidents get when they first arrive?
Not much, only in the sense that I think the infrastructure bill is one opportunity, and it's a big one, and it's a significant one.
I think corporate tax reform, too.
Right. So I think there will be, just in the sense that, I know just from the work I've done in kind of the nonprofit sector with groups like No Labels over the last few years, at this point in this country, and I think this is part of what they said about Donald Trump, is we don't care if it's a Democrat or Republican. We just want to get some problems solved. So I think there's a lot of that at play. I think members are kind of getting that message, and I give it till Christmas.
Can I just add on to what Mark's saying there? Because
Please.
I think what we saw in this election is that, like I was saying before, Democrats have a real problem with certain segments of voters. If Democrats are seen to be just being obstructionists and just causing gridlock in Washington, America's not necessarily going to like that.
Right.
I think that if there are legitimate questions to be asked, they should be asking them. But if there's progress that can be made, Democrats ought to be looking for ways to get aid to some of those folks out there who don't feel like they're getting enough attention of the people in Washington.
Bill, let me ask you this one more question. Starting in January, you won't have the White House, you won't have the speakership or the majority leader slot. We don't know who the chair of the DNC is going to be. Who should be the leading spokesperson for the Democratic Party come January, if you could designate someone?
Well, I think Nancy Pelosi has a very strong voice, and she will certainly be out there. And you'll have a whole coterie of Democrats who are out there speaking for the party. But, this is going to be a moment of Democrats figuring this out, and you'll see a lot of people acting as spokesperson. Everybody from Kamala Harris, who was just elected to the Senate from California, to Kirsten Gillibrand in New York, to people across the country. So I think we're going to be auditioning a lot of different people to be the spokesperson for the party, and that's going to go on for a good 4 years.
All right, Bill, I'm going to make a point of not telling Chuck Schumer that you didn't mention him on that list, because if he heard that, he'd come all the way out there. And
it was a mistake. I meant to say Chuck Schumer first. I totally meant to say Chuck Schumer first. He's welcome to come to Santa Barbara, though.
I don't want to send him out there to wring your neck.